Hey everybody, it took me a little bit to think about what I wanted to say for Skyward Sword HD, considering that this is a trilogy that nobody wanted, or the quadrilogy I guess that nobody wanted, but here I am, and all because I made a stupid video about, Skyward Sword being, an overpriced port. Anyway. Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD. This just came out last month. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I'm sorry, I like Skyward Sword. Fight me. Yes, fight me, because I like Skyward Sword before it was cool, okay? Like, everybody on the Twitters, like, nearly everybody on my Twitter feed was all like, whoa, Skyward Sword is a good game? And I'm just like, always has been. I'm just legitimately like, I'm so glad that Skyward Sword is finally getting like the much needed respect it deserves, because the HD version does something that, it pretty much is needed for this type of game. And that would be one of the biggest improvements to Skyward Sword HD. Now, before I go on, obviously, I have to establish where I stand on Skyward Sword in the Zelda series, because that's just how I do. So, I remember getting Skyward Sword on release year, 2011. I have been eagerly awaiting this game, and at first stance, it was my favorite at the time. I actually really dug the motion controls. I really dug the story, the characters, the fact that the entire world was like an adventure, Like getting to visit each region and just doing all the puzzles and doing all the good stuff with the combat and everything. Like that really felt like an adventure, and some of the dungeons have been like some of the best in the series. Like, I really like dungeons like the Ancient Cistern, like that. And yeah, I just really like it. But, of course, the flip side is that not everybody can, stand the motion controls. And I understand that. And I do have to absolutely agree that Fi can get in the way, too much. Like, one of my biggest problems with Fi at the time was the fact that you get to discover these, like, really cool gameplay mechanics, like the time sip stones. Like, that's a really cool mechanic, one of my favorites. And you see it happen. Like, you hit the time sip stone, right? And then everything goes from the future from the present to the past. And you see that happen. But then it all gets ruined by the fact that Fi says, "Oh, Master, look over here. The time sip stone seems to be, radiating an energy," or whatever. But basically, Fi just basically ruins gameplay mechanics, like the player's discovery of really cool gameplay mechanics, by having her explain what just happened to the player. And yeah, I didn't really like that. Which is why I'm thanking God the HD version exists. Because for one thing, most of Fi's advice during gameplay is like completely optional. Like it's completely optional, which better helps the pacing of Skyward Sword, which I'm like, thank God. Because ultimately, what this remaster is, well, just to jump the gun a bit, it's a remaster that basically helps with Skyward Sword's pacing. Like, I beat the game in just under 25 hours. Like, even with me trying to 100% it, which I obviously didn't do, because I only ended up with like 18 hearts and however else I did. But that's neither here or there. And, yeah, it just really helped the pacing of the game, with Fi no longer constantly interrupting you. Now, of course, in some cases, she doesn't completely, go away, which is unfortunate because, well, one prime example that I would like to bring up is the Pirate Stronghold, which is a mini dungeon in Lanayru Sand Sea. Like, you know, the game has been pretty good at keeping Fi to just basically story moments where she's like, you know, Master, I recommend going back to the Isle of Songs, or Master, I recommend going back to, you know, the Goddess statue, or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And unfortunately, she also, explains the mechanic of carrying the time shift stones all over the place, which is unfortunate, but Skyward Sword HD also has a mute button for Fi, which is basically the B button. Like, anytime, like, obvious advice comes in, I would always end up just mashing the B button because I know what she's going to say. Which, I'm honestly thinking that mashing the B button is even a thing at all because the text speeds have also been adjusted too. Like, you literally can just mash the B button to just skip through Fi's, you know, redundant explanations, you know, just like in like a second. In just literally a second. Where she's obviously explaining, hey Master, look over here, B button. So yeah, I'm just very thankful that even if she does interrupt you, you can just mash the B button in order to effectively, you know, skip the advice. Like, when I found all the keys to, the key pieces to, you know, the fire temple, I forget which it is. I forget what the second dungeon's name is. Oh my god, I know that temple very well. It's not the fire sanctuary, no, but, you know, the second dungeon in the game, where she's like, you found all 5 key pieces, Master. Go back to the temple entrance. I'm just like, you know, mashing the B button because I know. But, you know, very thankfully, you know, those are skippable, but also the fact that she constantly interrupts you is just, you know, an optional thing now. So that's all well and good. Again, I'm thanking God. And also, you know, skippable tutorials. They effectively, like, cut down all of the major tutorials in the game. Well, not really all of them, just the vast majority of them, so that you can get to, you know, the goddess statue faster in order to see Zelda at the very beginning of the game. Which, you know, I've seen, like, at least 1 or 2 people who call Skyward Sword's beginning slow, and, you know, I don't disagree. Like, I really don't mind the beginning of Skyward Sword so much because, you know, the characters are so good. But I do agree that, you know, the beginning of the game, before you get to actual, you know, Link has the sword or whatever, it does take a while. Like, honestly, I don't really mind the beginning so much because it's not really like Twilight Princess's opening where you just do so much before you get started on your, you know, big adventure, you know? I feel like this is faster. I feel like this is like a faster opening because the tutorials are just streamlined and I'm just like, thank you for pacing. There's no longer like that forced sword tutorial, or you can still like skip finding Mia the freaking Remlet for Instructor Alwyn or something, or Horel, or whichever one it is. So yeah, plus the cutscenes are like skippable if you're a Skyward Sword veteran. And if you're not, then at the very least the tutorials are cut down, I guess. I don't know, like maybe you can call the beginning slow. I don't blame you. So yeah, I just really don't blame you. But you can actually play Skyward Sword like a human being now. Yeah, like, okay, so here's the thing. Button controls. I've actually played most of this game on handheld mode, where unfortunately, in some instances, I had to experience Joy-Con drift, which is unfortunate, but at the very least, I was able to play Skyward Sword like an actual human being. Like, the button controls are probably the most interesting part to me, because the sword where it was like mapped to like the movements of the right of your right hand and or your right Joy-Con or the remote. Like, you can play Skyward Sword with by just flicking the right stick every single direction possible. And I don't know, it's a little bit of a learning curve if you are a Skyward Sword veteran. Like, you're so used to the motion controls that you just forget, like, hey, you can just play Skyward Sword like a regular guy, you know, you can just use the controller now. And it does take some time to get used to. Like, I had to get used to, you know, using the sword and doing all of the stuff that used to require motion controls a lot. But once you get the hang of it, you really, really do get the hang of it. Like, thank God the bug net is no longer like a bad thing. And thank God you can actually fly around the sky like an actual human being now. And just thank God for just button controls. And I have a feeling that's going to be like the defining factor of this HD version. Just the fact that you're able to play with a controller now, with nearly everything mapped to like a specific button or whatever, it just makes the experience like so much easier. Like, the harp still sucks as an instrument, but at the very least, the harp minigame at the Lumpy Pumpkin during that quest line is just so much easier now. I'm just like, thank you, God. I was able to get it in one try. So that should be like a testament to how good button-only controls are. So, yeah. And I'm very thankful that they didn't really change up the game, you know, too much just to suit the button controller's needs, because, again, Skyward Sword was designed purely for the Wii. And somehow they were able to make it work with button-only controls, which is very nice. Very nice indeed. But aside from all of those, though, I just really feel like, you know, even though I had a really, really good time with Skyward Sword HD, that led me to ask the question, how is it as a remaster? Like, how is it as, you know, a remaster or an HD port or whatever? And honestly, it's not really too different, aside from the obvious things. Like, obviously, the resolution bump from 480 to 1080p is really noticeable, because it really does bring out the art style of Skyward Sword, which is very unique and obviously will age much better than Twilight Princess HD will ever do. And aside from that, 60 FPS for about 95% of the game. How is it that a 480p Wii game upgraded to 1080 60 FPS runs so much better than some PC games? I swear to God. I'm gonna get in so much trouble for that. I just really like seeing constant 60 FPS in Skyward Sword HD, even though it's not really that hard of a problem, which, you know, Kingdom Hearts collection on the Nintendo Switch, you don't have an excuse, because Skyward Sword HD runs flawlessly. So, oh yeah, and there's also camera control, you know, autosaves, you know, the obvious stuff, like no more redundant item explanations, which again help pacing, cutting down on tutorials, toning down Fi, skippable dialogue and cutscenes, and obviously the amiibo support, which we're not going to get into that. No, we're not talking about that. You know, aside from all of those things, pretty much just like I said with Link's Awakening, if you ever caught that Let's Play, which, let's face it, nobody did. Barely anybody did. Skyward Sword HD is just a straight-up HD port with quality of life improvements, which I'm just gonna say it. It's not really too bad, and you're definitely getting your money's worth because Skyward Sword is really good. I really enjoyed it, and I will recommend this game now. I have absolutely no problem in saying that I can recommend this game to people now. But I do actually have to agree with the other side, in that it doesn't really do enough to justify it being $60. Like, I have a feeling that it should have made improvements in some areas that I don't think anybody is talking about. Like, I haven't seen, like, you know, other reviews of Skyward Sword HD as a HD port or anything like that. And I actually beat the game all the way through, so I'll know what I'm talking about. So for starters, they really should have just sped up the flight in the sky. Because, honestly, like, flying in the sky with your Loftwing is exciting for, like, a few hours. But then again, it'll get kind of redundant and tedious after a little bit. So they really should have just sped up your Loftwing's speed. You know, I'm just saying, they really should have just sped up your Loftwing like they did with the Swift Sail in Wind Waker HD. Which, I have to say, is still the best HD Zelda game that we've had, or Zelda port that we ever had. The other thing that I think they definitely should have toned down was, well, toned, because the tad tones still stink. They really should have just toned down the amount of tad tones that you had to find during that whole thing in your third vision to Faron after the third Imprison fight, and you find out that Faron Woods is flooded thanks to the water dragon, and you have to find tad tones in order to prove that you're able to get part of the Song of the Hero and everything. So they really should have just cut down that thing by half, and also cut down the Elden stuff by half in the third visit, so that it doesn't really feel like, you know, that bad. Even though I don't mind Elden, I really don't want to talk about the tad tones ever again unless I decide to play it again. And once again, I honestly just really feel like they really should have kept down Fi in places where I think it was needed. Like, she still talks about, you know, obvious things. I mean, it's related to the plot, sure, but I think the player gets it at that point where she's saying, you know, with this new enhancement, you're able to learn a new song. Go back to the Owl of Songs, please. And it's just like, you know, the player gets it. With just a single sentence, you can literally just say, hey, I get it. So, yeah. And also, they really should have just done some things that could have made, you know, Skyward Sword easier in, and I'm just saying more accessible, I guess. Like being able to track heart pieces or, you know, goddess cubes. I mean, the goddess cube thing is still there, I guess. And being able to track down, you know, actually, dowsing still works fine, I guess. You don't really need it, but it still works fine. Oh yeah, and also, you really should have just let us go out and fly around the sky at night. That would have been cool, but no. Apparently you didn't do that. Skyward Sword HD for the Nintendo Switch. Buy it for $60, please. So, yeah, they definitely did do what is now called the quote-unquote bare minimum when it comes to, you know, just simply upscaling this game and putting it on the Nintendo Switch with quality of life improvements. Like, I get that. I really get that. But joke's on you. I was excited for this game, like, when it was announced, and I wanted to relive Skyward Sword again because Skyward Sword is really good. It still has fantastic characters, a really good setting for the world. It has a simple story that's fleshed out by these great characters. The button controls may have some time to get used to, but once you get used to them, it feels natural. And the dungeons are still really great. The boss fights, most of the boss fights anyway, are still really fantastic. The music's great. And the art style will age better than all of these realistic games will ever do. But, you know, that's just me. That's just me. You can hate on Skyward Sword all you want. I ain't gonna stop you if that wasn't your thing. But for the rest of us, Skyward Sword HD may not be the best remaster or HD port out there. But if it's a good game at all, then I'm all for it. Just make it $50 and you're good to go. Nah, just kidding. Like, Nintendo can set the prices whatever they want. It's fine. It's not like, you know, the next generation games are getting more and more expensive, so you have to pay, you know, $70, I guess. Oh. Yeah, I'll take $60, thanks.